Okay, great. Then, hi all. Welcome to the first quarterly meeting of the Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee for 2021. You all know me, but for the good of the public, my name is Jessica Sutter. I represent Ward 6 on the DC State Board of Education, and I am proud to be now chairing alone this group for this year, as my prior co-chair is no longer an elected member of the board. But delighted to see so many of you back again, and delighted that so many of you were willing to really double down on your social studies volunteer commitments and support the work of the OSSE Technical Writing Committee. So as we talk about that tonight, I'm pleased to see a few folks who are part of both of our groups here tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pull up our deck for this evening so we can jump right in. And now I just downloaded it, but where did it go? There we are. Okay, you should all be able to see that. And then we'll just get this into slideshow mode. Okay, fantastic. So this is the agenda we shared with all of you, and it remains basically the same. We'll do a quick little icebreaker. I promise not to make it too painful, but would love to just get back in the groove of reminding us who's in the room and having the chance to connect on what we've missed since December. We'll talk a little bit about the newly assembled OSSE Technical Writing Committee, including a few of your colleagues on the SISAC who are now also part of the Writing Committee. We'll spend a little time in breakout groups talking about how we'll engage with that Writing Committee this year. And then we'll end with some talk about how to generally communicate some of the goings on in social studies, both in DC and nationally. I imagine that a number of you were in the previous webinar that was headed around the new framework or roadmap around civics that was just released today. And so we imagine there'll be more kinds of events like that happening. We want to talk about how best to keep folks apprised of all of that, but also to communicate how we continue building social studies community that is statewide. Scott obviously has a fantastic newsletter that I set aside time each month to read for DCPS, but want to make sure we think about how to extend and expand that to become a real statewide effort that can grow out of this work. And we'll end with a few next steps for the rest of the year. Tonight, basically 2 objectives: talk about the ongoing revisions and have a sort of discussion about how to keep developing this work and a community statewide around social studies going forward. For reminder, these are all of the folks who are here as part of the SISAC, whether they are present with us this evening or not. As I mentioned, we have some folks with various commitments this evening, but incredibly grateful for all the service you've put in so far and the commitment you made to continue working with us on this social studies work. These are the same norms we used last time. You'll be in breakout rooms for a part of this, so I think that's going to be a particularly important time to bring your energy, whether or not you're able to be on screen, participating vocally or in the chat. Just bring that energy and push us on our thinking about how best to keep engaging in this work going forward. I'm sure we haven't come up with all the ideas and want to make sure we're hearing that from all of you. So, welcoming you back. We have a couple of poll questions and then one for the chat. I was thinking about the kinds of things people have done or trained for or practiced while in this very unusual year. So we'd love to take a poll of, have you ever done any of these 3 things? Run a marathon, played Fortnite, baked bread? So drop your answers into the poll. And if you'd rather engage in the chat or willing to do both, what is the most useless item in your home at present? All funny answers are also welcomed. So we'll give you about 5 minutes to go ahead and think on this, drop some ideas in the chat, and answer the poll. And then we'll go ahead and see if anyone wants to volunteer to share out. Okay, let's take about 2 more minutes. I'm loving the answers to useless items. I like that we're sharing the feelings of sadness over the passport, that we've given John Paul a use for his bow tie. I had the chance to recently wear a pair of high heels for the first time in a year, to go to an outdoor masked work clothes event. We're going to go ahead and close the poll in just a second here and share the results. Did something wonky happen with the poll? I feel like we had more respondents and then they went away. Did something happen there, John Paul?
Yeah, I think I may have hit the button wrong.
Want to try it again?
Yeah, if folks who have already responded can go back and do it again. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm not good with polls.
I can't do it as a co-host, so I just watch the numbers come up. So we'll give folks one more chance. Go in and respond to the poll, and we'll share results in about 45 seconds. All right, I'm not sure the polling is working, so we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead and just wrap it up. I did see that there were a few folks opposed to the idea of marathons. I loved the answers on Fortnite because I am also with the crew building a fort inside rather than having any access to the games themselves. And I'm real curious about the bread bakers because that was one piece of this trend of the past year that I did not take part in. I love to bake, but bread is very intimidating to me. Anyone want to chime in and share either their useless thing or their feelings on any of the poll questions?
Well, I can share my useless item.
Yeah, let's hear about it.
So if you've ever watched like a soccer match, FIFA World Cup, if you've seen those long plastic horns that people have, it's called a vuvuzela. One of my college friends did study abroad in South Africa, and he picked up a few of them and gave them to some of his friends, and I still have it as a keepsake. I don't use it because everyone's working from home. If I were to use it during the workday, it might cause some problems, but it is something that I just have. I just like to have it on display in my living room.
I like it. I would imagine that if you did decide to use it during the workday, folks would be really confused about where the sound was coming from and what they were supposed to do with it. Any other folks interested in sharing your items or your poll responses?
I will say I made a very tasty cinnamon swirl crunch bread yesterday. And it is a yeast bread. And it did require overnight proofing in the refrigerator. So it's not like a one and done quick bread, but it's very good. And it will make excellent French toast this weekend.
See, I appreciate that sort of advanced planning, Alex. I also wish I lived closer to you so that I could try to swindle my way into a few slices of that. That sounds delicious.
Yeah, raising the bar high for all of us, Alex, for home baking.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I appreciate you indulging in a little bit of goofiness before we dive in on this. I'll go back to sharing our deck for the night, and we'll move on to the business of the portion of the meeting. Last night was the first meeting of the OSSE Technical Writing Committee. Just so happens that this is a deeply social studies themed week. The committee convened last night, and we wanted to share with you a little bit about this group. There are a few members of the SISAC who are part of it. So after I give a couple points, I'd love to turn it to the folks who are on both committees to see if they have anything they'd like to add. There are 30 members of the OSSE Writing Committee, and we'll make sure, if we haven't already, though I think we may have in the agenda, share the link where you can see the names and organizational affiliations of the folks on the Writing Committee. There are 5 members of our SISAC who are part of the Writing Committee as well, so there'll be some good continuity as well as a nice feedback loop. There are educators from DCPS schools and public charter schools and from higher education. They're going to be meeting throughout the year, ending at the end of 2021, hopefully. And they were last night, as part of the first meeting, still establishing a little bit about the cadence of meetings and when those will happen. But as we have more information on that, we'll happily share that back with all of you. OSSE awarded a contract to the American Institutes for Research, AIR, to work with them to facilitate the writing process. AIR has worked with a number of states and is currently working with a number of states on facilitating their social studies standards writing processes. So we were excited that they made that award because the folks they're working with have deep experience in helping states construct and revise social studies standards. And we'll be able to bring in the institutional knowledge of what other states are doing and have done, what has worked and what has not, and what that context might offer to the writers as they begin their work. One really exciting thing that I heard mentioned last night in the meeting is that the OSSE Writing Committee process calls for iterative feedback from the SISAC. That was something we had asked about in the process and didn't have great clarity on. But last night in the meeting, in their presentation, the folks from AIR shared that they expect that there'll be a couple of rounds of feedback that the writing committee will seek to solicit from the SISAC. One happening late this spring about the structure of the standards, basically a framework and a structure for how they plan to organize the standards. And the second, sometime in this summer, likely closer to July, for the initial draft of the standards when they'll want some feedback. One other thing that became clear last night is that the high school standards will not change in terms of the course designations or the sequence of courses, that was a distinction OSSE had made as part of the writing. You'll remember we talked about that when we had asked about what our parameters were, and we said that we were unable to influence the graduation progression. OSSE confirmed last night that they plan to keep the 4-course progression in the order that it exists. However, the standards themselves within the courses are open to revision, just not changing the progression of courses or changing the names and identification of courses. But other structures, whether the pre-K through 8 standards stay in the same order or change around, all of that is in the purview of the writing committee and will be part of, I think, this structuring of the standards, which they will be bringing back to the SISAC for feedback. I'm going to stop there and ask first if there are folks from the writing committee who would like to chime in and add things that I did not note.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melanie. I'm on the writing committee. I just would share that the writing committee seemed very excited to be there and very enthusiastic about the work that we're going to be engaging in. I was happy to see Sarah there. as well. The only thing I would add is that as excited as people were, there were some things that the writing committee was less pleased about in terms of the guiding principles, one of them being the wording on the preamble that states well-educated American students. There was some conversation about that being very isolating, I think was one of the words, and exclusive. It wasn't inclusive of our immigrant population, which is very large in DCPS, well, in DC in general. So there were, I think, a couple of questions of like, what are some things we could possibly still revise about the guiding principles? But either way, I think the larger takeaway was there are some things that could still be tweaked about the guiding principles, but as the technical writing committee, we will do our best to make sure that even the things that are left out are still included so that the guiding principles are alive through the revisions. And Jessica did a good job of pointing out that the guiding principles are the floor, not the ceiling.
Thanks for those additions, Melanie. I do know that phrase was a topic of a lot of discussion. And to the point Melanie ended on, I tried to emphasize that the principles themselves are what we expect the standards will include, but certainly that phrasing that is in here can be evolved, changed, adopted, adapted, iterated upon as folks write the standards, and things that they put in the standards are what will be shared with teachers, right? That's the standards that we'll vote on to adopt. So I don't want folks to feel uncomfortable about what's in the guiding principles, but I also don't want folks to feel like this is the document on which we should dedicate our energy or that the writers should dedicate their energy to, but rather that they should use the standards as a means of codifying the things that they want to see taught to our students and delivered to our teachers as part of that work. Any other insights from folks who are part of the writing committee?
Hello, this is Mike. I definitely echoing what Melanie said. I just really appreciated using that specific example and a couple of others that surfaced that I felt like there were blind spots with the guiding principles, despite my investment in it and certainly my belief in it that I was unaware of or I'd overlooked. And I was appreciative of the group last night and so many individuals raising those things that I and maybe we had overlooked as a whole. So I thought that was really nice and beneficial. I think another observation I had was at the beginning when we were sharing out our hopes and dreams and whatnot for the new standards, one of the reoccurring themes I heard people reference was a simpler, more precise document, which I know we've talked a lot about here. But then I also noticed, as I think we found ourselves doing at time in this task force, as people started hitting up the chat with ideas they have for the standards, we kind of started to approach like an expansive view of all of these other ideas. So I think just as our group struggled at creating a simplistic, easy to follow document, we on this next endeavor are also going to struggle with the idea of what can you take stuff out, but more, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, yeah, an example, there were just like some really wonderful examples in the chat around the principle of human rights and opportunities to discuss like the role of incarceration and other things. And ideas started to shoot from there of referencing what Elizabeth just chatted. Of this struggle I think we're gonna have of narrowing down, but also wanting to expand in other areas.
Thanks, Michael. I'll say that I think one of the things that is super promising about the iterative nature of the feedback that the writing committee, it seems, willing to engage in with the SISAC is that we did our best to dialogue amongst ourselves and with the broader public about what we were thinking and pondering as we created these principles. We'll now have a writing committee that has us as their thought partners, people who have been as dedicated to thinking about the standards to feed these ideas back and forth with. And I think having an additional set of folks, but folks equally invested in making sure we get this right, will be powerful in helping narrow down the blind spots and highlight some of the places where there are need for feedback and deeper discussion before we land on the right set of standards for our students. All right, I'm going to move on, but as you get into small groups, we'll have more chance to talk about how to engage with the writing committee. And when we come back from those groups, if there are additional thoughts, we can revisit these questions. So we're going to send you into some breakout rooms to talk about really two things. So as the OSSE Writing Committee begins its work, we want to figure out how we best structure our work for this year. And there are sort of two things we want to think about. What could we proactively do in 2021 to make sure that we're continuing our work on the standards, but also being ready for the kinds of things that the writing committee may ask of us? So for instance, something we pondered but didn't get the time to do together was writing exemplars and non-exemplars of what we meant by some of the guiding principles. Is that something proactive we could or should begin to do so that that might be helpful to the writing committee? And then second, what should the writing committee be able to count on us to do? What are we willing to commit to in the next year so that we're ready for the writing committee should they need it of us? Thinking about things like when they bring us a structure for the standards, are we going to meet in person? Are we going to do that asynchronously? What should they be able to count on us to do as part of our role as advisors in this process? So I'd like to give you time to do that. I'm going to ask if Alex, did you already do this? Yeah, dropped a Google Doc in the chat. This is a shared document where you can record your brainstorms when you go into your breakout groups. And we'll ask you to take about 15 minutes to do that, and then we'll bring you back so that we can talk through some of the ideas you put in the document. We're going to sort you randomly. So before you go, are there any questions about what you should do for the next 15 minutes? Okay, looks like folks are on point with what they need to do. I will go ahead and ask John Paul to send you into your rooms. Okay, it is nice to see folks back again. And because we only have an hour together, this is going so quickly. But if it looks like from the notes, folks had really vibrant conversations. So I'd love to see if anyone wants to volunteer to share something that struck them in their discussion. It looks like we had 4 groups. So happy to hear from all 4, or happy to hear from fewer. But anyone want to jump in and share something that struck them in the conversation about either what we can proactively offer or what folks on the writing committee can count on us for? Anyone from my group want to share? Because you guys had some great thoughts.
I can share, mainly because I feel the pain of asking in a Zoom room and getting no response. So I have your back. I will happily share. We talked a lot about using us as sort of testers of language, testers of ideas, and sort of helping to push over maybe some gaps that might happen in the writing to make sure that the language that's used matches the intention and the meaning. And so using us as sort of experts in the field, but a fresh set of eyes who weren't actually writing the words on paper is a way to sort of test out the standards. We also started to talk and then sort of ran out of time around maybe this is a team that helps develop a bit of a conversation or a tool around bridging the old and the new. So highlighting what's new, figuring out how to communicate the new parts of it, even though it may, like, some old stuff is staying, but like how to sort of explain that connection and the different use of verbs and things like that to highlight the new so it doesn't feel so overwhelming as folks look at it.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for taking one for our team. Any of the other groups have anything that jumped out for them?
Yeah, one thing we brought up that I thought was pretty important was this group's ability to like continue to be a vehicle for the democratization of this process, right? Like, I think it's something we started, and I don't think it's something that needs to stop. I think, like, and I said this in our group, like, if we're going to truly be anti-racist with this, like, we have to like sort of reject systems, these top-down systems that created our old standards in the first place. I think we got some good feedback, but I think there are definitely holes. A big thing is I don't think we've heard a ton from students at all, and I think that's pretty important. And I mentioned this in our group. I think it'd actually be pretty important for us to hear from students both before and after there's some product ready, right? I want to know, like, before they're primed with something, like, what does your version of social studies that is just and that is like effective and will help you to operate as an effective citizen in this nation look like? But also, like, once we give it to you, like, what's your feedback? And Scott Abbott also pushed us on, like, there are just a lot of other stakeholders as well, like who are going to have feedback as well. Like, there's quite often an issue with standards when they're being made in other localities, where, like, after they're made, like, people show up and say, hey, well, you missed this and you missed this and you missed this. One thing we could do, since we've already started this, is to try to catch those folks before, like, we're done. Right? And we have this thing we've worked on for 2 years and people are telling us, like, why it's wrong. Let's get them now and get their feedback in now. Be judicious about it, but continue that path right now.
Yeah, I love that. I love anything that improves the process, learning from others' mistakes so that we make new mistakes. And I would just as soon not make the mistakes that lots of states do and wait till the end. Your point about students, though, Fadal, I think is great. And one thing that I had some back chat with the AAR team about after last night's meeting was, who should they be bringing in to talk to the writers? And so I hear loud and clear that students are some of who they should be bringing in. Any other last thoughts on this before we move to wind down what feels like we just got started tonight?
I'll throw something in.
Thank you.
My group is being modest, and I appreciate this. So this is Jessica Rucker So one thing, we would like to move forward with providing exemplars, kind of building on, I think, some of what we heard from Karen. And then we also talked about ways to get information out to social studies groups, whether that's teachers or groups that are already organized around the themes of social justice and social studies standards teaching, to perhaps get pulse checks and feedback around wording and inclusion and inclusiveness. And then we had some discussion around the implementation of the standards around the DCPS scope and sequence, and how that may or may not impact the revision of the standards.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica.
So I'm wondering, building on what Fadal was saying, and I'm thinking about, so I'm kind of on the upper elementary team now of the writing committee, which historically has looked at like exploration, right, and colonization and things like that. Is there a way that we can identify experts for certain topics or content areas within the social studies so that we can be kind of a little more strategic? Like there's less time for upper elementary to do like a really exhaustive look at geography. And so is there a way to kind of pinpoint experts to support kind of the different groups? I'm not sure. Anyway, I don't know if that's a good idea or not.
Well, one thing, and I like Fadal's note in the chat around subcommittees. So one thing that I want to do is read through all the good ideas from all 4 groups, make sure that we combine them all and sort of reduce duplication, share them back out with all of you asynchronously over email to see like what rises to the top and if there are groups that we should form to do this work. And then also offer the ideas to the writing committee and AIR and say like, of these, what's most helpful now versus what is most helpful later? And then come back to you all with a plan of action. So if that's amenable, we'll clean up the notes, put them in some order, share them back with you and share them with the folks associated with the writing, and plan some course of action for there. Because I think that y'all have great ideas. I don't want to step on toes, but I also want to make sure that the folks involved with the writing recognize that they have a resource in the form of this SISAC that is not just about advise, but is also happy to do some proactive work to support them. The other thing that came up in some of your conversations, I think highlights the last thing we wanted to touch on tonight, which is sort of this, I keep wondering if there's a better word or a better way to describe it, because it feels so large and amorphous. But the word that keeps coming to me is community. So the things we want to talk about in the social studies updates piece were, there's a lot going on both in DC and around the country around social studies. And like I said, Scott Abbott has a great DCPS newsletter that goes out. And Scott, I say this with great love, but I like set aside almost half an hour to read it because there's so much in it, between shout outs to teachers, ideas about conferences, links to click on. It's really a wonderful, rich list, but I don't know who outside of DCPS gets it. So I don't know whether teachers and charters can subscribe, do subscribe, I don't know. But I want to make sure that we are using this group to also figure out what's the best way to share the work that's happening. Like a lot of you were on this Educating American Democracy release that happened earlier today, but I'm sure not everybody was, and some of you may have wanted to be. So how can we best share through all these different things that are happening? And then how do we create space for a statewide community around social studies in DC? And I'm going to share my reflection on why I think that matters. The last event I went to before last year's COVID shutdown was the Middle States Council for the Social Studies. And I have a great picture of me and Scott Abbott and Mike Stevens there. And I met Alicia Butler, who's on the writing committee, who's a teacher at McKinley Tech. But that was an incredibly white space. And most of the Black teachers I met at the conference were not DC teachers. They were Maryland teachers. And it makes me wonder what kind of statewide community we have built in DC that reflects the diversity of the social studies community in DC, and whether there's a way for us to do that and to use this group to start to think about, like, is it a virtual community? Could start at that now. Are there ways we could be building and illuminating this? Because the writers brought up last night, like, well, you know, everyone's got limited time on social studies. And it's true. But if we ever want to push the importance of social studies and get it the attention it deserves, we have to keep building the community to advocate for it, the visibility of it, as you all do in your work. But the collective power, I think, is enormous, and the potential is huge. So feel free to drop some thoughts in the chat. Looks like, you know, Scott could start a subscription model here with all the interest in the newsletter. But what else should we be doing? What's the best way to share this info? And how could we continue to build this community? We got just a couple minutes left, but I'd love to spend a few minutes, either ideas on the chat or out loud. What could we or should we be doing to get this information out and to build community?
This is Laura. I think one thing would be just to like map out what social studies communities are already there. Like even just polling this group as to what exists, what are we a part of? Because, you know, sometimes when you create something new, it's like, oh, it's another thing. But if we have like a way to try to integrate it into what's already out there, that could work. And then finding out how could we maybe connect these groups that maybe are kind of separate, but are looking for a bigger connection. So that'd be one thought for me.
I like that idea. Thank you for that, Laura. And it looks like, Jessica, you've put in that there's like, here's a group that's already out there, DC Area Educators for Social Justice. Other thoughts on this? Sounds like lots of folks are going to subscribe to Scott's newsletter. All right, well, what I might do then is I like this idea that Laura has pointed out to map out what's out there. I imagine that's going to be a follow-up question we send to you in an email. Like, what social studies communities are you already part of? So that we can start to put together like a resource map of this is what's there, here's who's part of it. How do we begin to network these things and keep folks posted on it? I know we've got, it looks like a hand went up and then came down.
Oh yeah, that was me.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about in terms of for DCPS social studies teachers, I think there needs to be probably an attempt to sort of push the value of like the collective. And I think that looks like PDs that are very teacher-centered. And when I say teacher-centered, I mean like teachers are presenting to DCPS like what their concerns are and what they would want help with. And then we create professional development from there. And professional developments provide collaborative time for like actual problems to be worked on together. I think like that time to build relationships and like that time to like actually see that like, oh, we are doing this better as a collective, right? This whole with it that is a, you know, sum is greater than sum is part, sorry. Like I think that would help quite a bit.
Awesome.
I would just add too that when you start
I like that suggestion in the chat.
Oh, sorry, maybe you're delayed.
Go ahead.
I would just say when you start to create space like PDs that are teacher created, teacher centered, and like super relevant to what am I going to do tomorrow, then you want to invite your friends. And so then that community starts to grow based on who we know and who we're inviting into this space. Where I don't want to invite my friends is into boring spaces. And so I think that's also a part of it.
Awesome. Looks like there's a lot of support for that point, and I apologize. I appear to be delayed tonight on my internet. I don't know why, so I'm sorry for the wonkiness. All right, I want to respect your time and end on time. So here's the last thing that we wanted to do. Our next meeting, currently scheduled, is in June because we're meeting quarterly. Then we have another meeting in September and another one in December. What we are still waiting for is this information, on spring and summer engagement with the writing committee, as well as any of the great ideas you all generated today around some of the proactive work y'all may want to engage in, and some of this network mapping for what exists as social studies community, what spaces could be created for delivering this super exciting, worthy of inviting your friends to teacher-led PD. So there will likely be some asynchronous engagement between now and June. Just a quick temperature check. If we got back something from the writing committee that required our feedback, what's your feeling on meeting again before June versus doing it all asynchronously? So if you want to drop in the chat, open to meeting or would prefer asynchronously, we'll just get a temperature check on that before we bid you all farewell. Okay, cool. So folks in general feel good about meeting in small groups, and that feels like a pretty clear answer. Okay. Before we wrap up, Alex, John Paul, anything else from our end on the state board side?
This is John Paul, nothing from me.
This is Alex, nothing
Great.
from me either.
Okay. And then from the group, anything else for the good of the order before I send you on your way at 6 o'clock? All right. Thank you for your time tonight. Thanks for continuing to be dedicated to this work. Look out for follow-ups from me and Alex about tonight's great notes, the possibility of breaking into smaller groups, and some network mapping on the social studies community in DC. Have a great night. It's still light out. It's the best thing.
Have a good one. Bye, everybody.
Bye, all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Say bye-bye, Margaret.
Bye, Margaret.
They say bye-bye, Margaret. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night. All right.
Hold on 1 second, please.